So several recessions ago, I can't remember which one, probably about 2009, 2010, when we went through the consultancy process with the staff about potential redundancies, it was an incredibly humbling experience. We had people in the company who would say, look, I'm a young person, I live at home with my parents, so-and-so has a young family, they have a mortgage. If you're going to make someone redundant, make me redundant.
Hi, I'm Belden Menkus. Welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders are doing and what they've learned along the way. My guest today is Graham North, Chief Executive Officer at Anstey Horn Co, which describes itself as the UK's leading specialist surveying practice. Founded in 1795 in London, the privately held company now employs about 120 people and operates across the UK. The firm is particularly well known for its expertise in rights of light, party wall, and fire consultancy. Graham, welcome to the Purposeful Strategist podcast.
Thanks, Belden.
Maybe just to start, for those of us who don't really have a background in your area, could you help us understand what those specialist practices are and what they do, and maybe even more generally, just give us a bit of background on the firm?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for stating that we were established in 1795, which if we did a root and branch, you could track our history back to that very time. But Anstey Horn, as it was back from the 50s and 60s, started to specialize in rights of light. So essentially, rights of light is somebody's right to receive light through a window. Some nasty developer comes along and blocks up that window, and the adjoining owner would then have a claim. Or if we're acting for a developer, we design buildings with the architects to make sure that the impact on the neighbouring properties is minimised or the neighbours are suitably compensated. The company then evolved into party wall specialists. Now, party wall matters have been around forever. I mean, first party wall legislation started after the Great Fire in 1666, where there were local bylaws passed to prevent the spread of fire, because they found in 1666, if you build party walls of straw and wood, tends not to keep the fires contained.
Not so good.
Not so good. And that's an interesting link for where we now are in 2024-25 in terms of our fire strategy and our fire consultancy piece, which I'll come on to in a little bit more detail in a second. And so throughout the 60s, 70s and 80s and into the 90s, the company was well known as rights of light and party wall consultants. The party wall legislation used to be contained just within central London. That then extended to the rest of England and Wales in 1997, with passing a legislation in 96. And we now work throughout the UK in terms of both rights of light and party wall matters. And then back in about the early 2000s, and I've been involved with the company since the 80s, was when I first joined from school. I had a short break away in another company, became chartered, and here I am today. But we found that as specialists, we found it very hard to retain talent because they wanted experience in other matters. We couldn't get them chartered through the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. So we wanted to develop a building consultancy team. We were also being asked by a number of clients, do we do other work other than just our specialisms? And at that time, we chose not to. And then we realized there were opportunities here. And so with the key aim of providing retention of staff opportunities to make sure there was a career path within Anstey Horn, and also because clients were asking us to do other stuff for them because they were happy with what we were doing elsewhere, we started to grow our building consultancy team. And after a couple of hiccups and false starts, it really took off almost just as we were coming out of COVID or halfway through COVID, primarily on the fire consultancy piece. So we had a handful of excellent building consultants working within the practice, but with the emphasis then on the need for fire regulation, establishing the need for external wall surveys, EWSs, we then found that we were finding a lot of buildings weren't conforming to the regulations. And as a consequence of that, and carrying out surveys and finding out more issues, we've now grown our building consultancy team as well. So our Rights of Light team is circa 25 30 people, party wall team about 20, and our builder consultancy team now is up to about 90 people. So all in all, we're in excess of 130 people. We've seen massive growth in terms of that building consultancy element where it's linked to fire regulation, poor construction, remediation, trying to make people's buildings safe, to make sure that they conform. There's been a lot in the press about how leaseholders are copying the bills for a lot of this effective work, which is, in many cases unfair. So we've had a real growth in that area. But what's so important and valuable for me to highlight is that clients have seen the expertise that we have, trust us with that expertise, and are now asking us to do other elements of work, which we now, having expanded our service lines, are able to provide in the same specialist way that we built our reputation on historically. And so when I first joined the practice back in the 80s, we were about 12 people. And we've grown and grown and grown, and certainly not down to me entirely, but in terms of the terrific people we've had around us and giving them the freedom to be able to express themselves, but within the parameters of what's important for the business, what the ethos of the business is in terms of that expertise, personalizing the experience with clients, making sure the clients trust us. And that trust isn't just about delivering work, it's actually trusting us to let them know when we can't help them, because it's beyond our expertise, and we wouldn't drop our standards to just take on a bit of work. If we can't do it to an expert level, we'll point them to someone who can and make sure that they get properly looked after.
Just for a minute, coming back to 1795, if I've got my maths right, that implies you're coming up to a 230th anniversary.
That's right.
And I think the business was originally founded as an auctioneering business. I know that's going a long way back, and you weren't with the business then.
It feels like it sometimes, but yeah.
But is there any record of why it was founded or what the original purpose was?
I think, as far as we can establish from research, is that in those days, there was no such thing as chartered surveyors, and certainly not chartered building surveyors. I mean, chartered building surveyors came around in the 70s. So that's a much more recent phenomenon in terms of specialisms as building surveyors. But back in those days, they were just auctioneers and valuers. So you would have auctions. People would buy and sell property through auction. That was the most common way of doing so. And you needed people who would put some values on those properties that were being auctioned. And so, as far as we can tell, that's where it was. What we've managed to trace as well, going way, way back, is that whereas our main office now is by Moorgate near Finsbury Square, I don't think we've ever, as a practice, been more than a mile away from where those first valuers and auctioneers started in 1795. They've always been in the City of London. And as far as we can tell, going back, we've had offices in Ironmonger Lane and Bow Lane, but we've never moved away from more than about a mile from the city centre of London, which is rather interesting. But yeah, so we've always been in the city, and because we now have other offices in other parts of the UK, Birmingham, Manchester, Bristol, Norwich, and places like that, being in the city centres of those places, again, gives us a foothold where people realise that we're invested in the area. It's very important that we have a presence in the area. You have to be there. You have to have local knowledge. You can't service work from London in the northwest or the southwest. You have to be present. And I think clients like that. I think they like to know that you're invested in the area, that you're not just dipping in to try and get a bit of work. You're actually committed. And I think that's an important part.
Yeah. If you had to describe the purpose of Anstey Horn today, what would you say it was?
The main purpose really is providing that expertise, that professional approach to help clients with the problems and the challenges that they face or what they're trying to achieve. And so we've thought long and hard, I think as many companies do, is what is our purpose? And I think for a long time, we went along going about our business, trying to be the very best we could be without really trying to define our purpose. And it's really an interesting exercise when you sit down and you try and succinctly describe what your purpose is. And after a lot of hours of cogitating over this, we've sort of come up with the specialist advice for the clients that really deals with the challenges that they face. And I think for the team and the staff working with the Anstey Horn, they have to identify with that. I think it's really important I know it's a cliche that companies say that their people are the most important asset. And it is a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's the truth. And if you've got your team engaged, if you've got people who are enjoying where they work, they're in a safe environment, they feel empowered, they feel protected, they feel they can make decisions without recriminations. And there'll be mistakes, there's always mistakes. And we try and minimize those, of course. But I think people have got to feel the freedom to be able to get on, feel supported, but have the freedom to show people what they can do and really exercise their expertise. And that's something we strive to achieve. So defining the purpose, that specialist professional advice really just is a strap line. But underpinning that is, what is it that sets us apart? What is it that makes it a place that you'd want to work? My ethos is that if you're going to work somewhere where you're happy, work somewhere where you're motivated, you're challenged, you have accountability. Provide the platform for those things, and I think people will then excel and really express themselves. And whilst we try and work within certain parameters, it's really important that individuals are able to express themselves. And in a professional services business like ours, clients want to work with people that they can relate to and trust, but get on with. We have to, and any company has to show why your team are as good as they are. And they can't demonstrate that if they don't have access to the clients and the contacts and are able to express themselves.
Yeah. How did you get to that? You called it a strapline, that rather succinct statement of purpose. If I were sort of a fly on the wall in the conversations and the meetings where that was happening, who would be there and what would they be talking about?
Well, what we actually did a little earlier this year, we did an extensive staff survey. So we asked everybody to contribute what they identified the company to be, what they identified their work to be. Did they feel supported? Did they not? And so on. So I'd be lying if I was to suggest it was perfect, but it was a very positive experience. I was very, very pleased with that. What we then did as a team of senior directors, about 18, 20 of us, is get in a room and really batted around with those results in front of us. And then took the senior management team's comments and opinions and then tried to whittle it down. So we sort of brainstormed, just throwing in lots of ideas. No such thing as a bad idea. Just give us your thoughts. What do you identify the company to be? What do you think it is that we do? So rather than me telling the company this is what we do, it was sort of reversed engineered. And the staff survey wasn't done for that purpose alone. It was really to gauge where we'd got to. So my ethos has been very much, let people express themselves. Let's try and hear what people have to say. And I think the older I've got, the more amenable I am to that, because I think I was much less mature for many years to listen to perhaps some constructional criticism, constructional observations, which didn't quite align with my own thinking. So I'm much more receptive now, because I've learned that to engage with the team is so much more valuable than either telling them what it is that you want or not listening. And it doesn't mean you have to still agree with them, but you can have a conversation and you can discuss things. And ultimately, a decision has to be made in what's going to happen. And that ultimate decision will, if needs be, come to me. And often through difficult times is when you really learn to listen. When things are going well, you just crack on and everything's going smoothly, work's coming in and money's being made and people are happy. But when things are tough, so we've been through a number of recessions in the property cycle, had to unfortunately cut costs, had to lose good people, which is never easy, because we always take people on in good faith. We want them to succeed. We want them to have a career. But sometimes circumstances change. COVID, another example of that, where we had to cut costs. It's really easy to think that, well, you're in charge, so therefore you have to make all the decisions. And you try and protect the staff from those decisions. But actually, it's the wrong thing to do. So several recessions ago, I can't remember which one, probably about 2009, 2010, when we went through the consultancy process with the staff about potential redundancies, it was an incredibly humbling experience. We had people in the company who would say, look, I'm a young person. I live at home with my parents. So-and-so has a young family. They have a mortgage. If you're going to make someone redundant, make me redundant. because the impact is much less on me than it is on others. That's a really humbling thing. And I think it was a real eye-opener for me. Talk to people. People are decent. People are honest. And you can learn a lot with engagement. I'm probably as proud of anything that I've done over the last 18 months is try to introduce that engagement piece. Make sure that the senior people are accessible to the rest of the business. Get stuck in, roll your sleeves up. Nothing that needs to be done shouldn't be done together as a team. Try and get not a them and us atmosphere. We're all in this together. Be seen, be visible. Make sure people know who you are. Make sure that they can talk to you. I'm much better at it. I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, far from it, but I'm much better at it as a consequence of starting to engage. And it's a privilege when you hear people talk in that fashion about trying to help others. They don't socialize externally, but they're looking out for each other.
Yeah.
And that's what most people do.
It seems like you took a very inclusive approach to developing the purpose, listening to people. I'm just a little curious, did you use any external support for that? Or was it, you did the survey and then kind of all the rest of it from there was internal discussions and kind of you and the leadership?
Yeah, we didn't use anyone external. I think there's a time and a place for external consultants when you need them. The thing about external consultants that I've found over time is that they struggle sometimes to get to grips with the business in a timely way. And we know the business intimately because we've been involved for so long. And so I find that it's not as constructive bringing somebody in externally. And I think it gives the wrong message as well to the team in terms of we don't trust ourselves to sort this out. We're specialist advisors. So I would encourage people to take specialist advice. But I think on certain things, it's important that people realize that this is for us to resolve. This is for us to address. If, as a consequence of this process, we need some extra help, we're happy to get some extra help. But actually, at the moment, let's deal with this ourselves. And I think the important thing as well with the staff survey was that we didn't go out of our way to ask them very pointed questions to try and generate responses in respect of purpose. That wasn't the idea of the survey. The idea of the survey was to try and get decent feedback, good, bad, or indifferent, to get a flavour of what people feel. Because what I might think is happening, what I might say to people gets interpreted, thought of in different ways. And so the perception is often different to what you might think it is. So, for example, I thought we had done a pretty good job of letting people know who the board were and what role they played. But it was very clear from the responses that people didn't know. Now, I actually thought we had done a pretty good job. But when I look back, I thought, no, I have done a pretty good job. But actually, it's irrelevant whether I think I've done a good job or not. People didn't hear that. They didn't see that. So we've got to rectify that. So we've got to do something different. So whatever I was doing before, we've got to change that around a little bit so that people understand who our chairman is and who I am. It doesn't matter what I thought we were doing well. If the perception is, I don't know who you are, Graham, I don't know what kind of person you are, I need to work harder at changing that so that people do know who I am and who the rest of the board are, and that there is a togetherness, not a them and us, And so it was a really valuable input that we got because, as I say, the perception is the reality.
If I could shift the focus a little bit, maybe to talk about strategy, what would you say your current strategic objectives are?
Well, again, as part of the engagement with the staff and then the senior management team is to really try and crystallize the strategic approach to something that is easy for everyone to understand and what historically has succeeded and still stands good for today. And that is looking after the clients, looking after your contacts, being available to them, making sure you get FaceTime with them, make sure they know who you are, make sure that you understand what their issues are, make sure that you understand what their motives are, what their main problems are, what their agenda might be. And so when you look at our strategic objectives, of which I tried to whittle down with the team to no more than half a dozen, it is focused on client contact, client contact, client contact, team engagement, team engagement, team engagement.
I'm getting a theme here.
And that's it. Now, having had a period of growth over the last couple of years, where we're trying to now consolidate a bit, so we've had a steep learning curve, new people joining the business, they're finding their feet. We've got lots of good work, but people take a while to bed in. And also, we're dealing with new elements of work, particularly the statutory provisions, Building Safety Act and so on, that's recently come in. This is new territory for everyone. So we're finding our feet in how to ensure the reports are fit for purpose and so on. So we've had a bedding in period. And so we're not looking for further expansive growth over the next couple of years. So we can park that element of it. Now we've got to revert back to principles, which is making sure we're looking after the clients, making sure we're looking after our team. That means for the senior management team to ensure that they're supporting the team who are delivering a lot of the work, and that team feel empowered to go out and deliver what we can do best. And so if I was to whittle it down to just two things, it would be client and team members. So we have the internal looking after our team members, making sure the senior management team give themselves enough time to spend time with their team members, because life's busy and we chase around, and before you know it, 2 or 3 months has gone and we haven't had a cup of tea with someone. To make sure we make time. So we've put a structure in place, which is sort of sounds counterintuitive to allow that empowerment piece, but you have to have a structure in place to make sure that people are reminded to give people the time to take a breath. Everything okay? Anything you need? What's not quite working out? Not solely in relation to specific work projects or tasks. People's well-being. Are they feeling supported? Have they got everything they need? Have we got the balance right about working from home, working in the office? Do they feel engaged? Do they feel listened to? All that kind of good stuff. And I think that can often cut out a lot of the things that may manifest itself under the surface, because there's no forum for people to have a chat in both directions, upwards and downwards, that people say, do you know what, I'm not quite happy with the work I'm doing. I don't feel supported. I feel I need a bit more training. I'm not getting enough of your time. And for line managers, stroke senior team members to say to their team member, look, this isn't quite working out. We need to look at this. So that's really what we looked at. In terms of the longer term strategy, I would like us to grow more, because I've always had a desire that I want to be involved with as many clients to show them what we can do. Not because I think we can, get to this size or make X amount of money. I'm just really proud of Anstey Horn, and I think we can really demonstrate to clients how good we are. So one of the really satisfying things that's happened over the last couple of years is that we've now been able to cross-refer work to different parts of the business, because we can introduce our existing clients, if you like, for many years to our fire consultancy element. And where we're getting new clients in who have come to us for that fire advice, we're now introducing them to the historical, traditional specialisms in terms of rights, light and party walk. So we're getting quite good traction in crossover between those parts of the business, which is very satisfying. And again, it demonstrates the trust that the clients have in us, that if you do this bit really well, can you also do that for us too, as well as you do those other bits? And clients are giving us the opportunity to demonstrate that, which is very satisfying.
It does seem to me Anstey Horn's grown, over the years. You said when you joined, it was a dozen or so people. But equally, if I understand the world you're in, there are lots of much bigger firms with, they've got offices around the globe and, et cetera, et cetera. How do you think about them as competition? Or do you think clients that want to work with someone like us, they're never going to think about somebody that size? How does all that competitive dynamic play out?
Well, I think that, some of the larger practices who work with the really big corporates, the corporates like the fact that they're associated with these big companies of many thousands of people. It comes with a name. It comes with a perceived support network where they have lots of people to be able to service their work and so on. And they're often tied into framework agreements where they get a lot of the work from those particular clients. And that for us detracts from what we're trying to achieve if we were to go down that particular route, because we want to firstly demonstrate to clients and our contacts that you get senior people giving you advice. You get what we might describe as the old grey hairs, people who have been around the block a few years. They've seen lots of stuff. And so you don't get past immediately down to members of the team who have less experience. Those members of the team are definitely going to be involved with the project, but you're not left with someone who perhaps doesn't have the experience or the position or the authority or the responsibility that clients expect to receive. And so I think that there are a huge number of organizations who are looking for that advice, where they have senior people who are accountable for what's happening within the company and delivery of the service and the report or whatever it is that we are doing for that particular client. It isn't something that we steer away from. It's just I don't think that framework agreements in the main are for us. And I'm not sure that clients always get the best service from those kind of arrangements either. I understand why they do it, but I'm not sure it's always best for them.
Yeah. I kind of imagine I know what a framework agreement is, but partly for my benefit and maybe for the benefit of people who aren't that close to your sort of business, what's a framework agreement and why do clients want them and what are the upside and downsides?
Well, essentially, a framework agreement is a client says, I have these properties, these are my assets, these are the kind of things I need advice upon. And they will go to a number of companies to tender for doing that kind of work for a fee. These big companies have huge demands for advice. And rather than cherry pick a dozen different companies to give them advice in certain areas, they'll go to one big company. And then there may be spin-offs from that. There might be other work that comes out of it. But essentially, that client will say to that company, I need advice on this. And because it's within the framework agreement, that advice will be given and it's all covered in the same fee. What we would say is, well, actually, that isn't best advice for you because these big companies, of which I am a fan, the reality is they can't possibly have the level of expertise in all the areas that a particular client might need. I also understand that that particular client can't be shopping around every time they need some advice. They just don't have time to do that. So I get that. So there's a balance in there. And I think that there are also some of these bigger surveying organizations, these property consultants, also recognize themselves there are areas where they can't cover that expertise. So they'll call in people like us and they'll trust us. You know, we're not after chasing their client. If somebody's good enough to play us in with their client because they can't deliver a particular service, they're honest enough to do that, which is absolutely as they should be. The last thing we would do is try and muscle in on that action. You want us to do this piece of work, we'll do that piece of work and that's it. We're not chasing your client. That's your client. They're our client while we're doing that bit of specialist advice. You've got to be honest. You have to be decent. You have to be honourable. You know, competition's tough, but actually you have no control over what they're doing, but you have complete control over what you're doing.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. I've seen way too many top teams get obsessed by what the competition's up to and almost forget, who are we? What are we trying to do?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that coming out of COVID and lockdowns and a downturn in work and, you know, there's a lot of smaller practices sprung up. You know, people realised actually, I'm going to set up on my own. And they set up at home. They have limited overheads. And it's almost like a race to the bottom in terms of price for what work they're doing, which then devalues what everyone else is doing. And so sometimes it's difficult because there is, you know, a lot of price sensitivity in the advice that you're giving. And I think it's easy sometimes to say, okay, let's see if we can just cut our service a little bit, do a little bit cheaper. And it's easy to get caught up in it because you think, right, we've got mouths to feed, we need work, we've got, you know, and then you realize actually, we're not making money on this. We're not even breaking even. And if we all go down that route, we can't stand out as specialists. Now, we lose work because of that, because of the price sensitivity around certain tasks that we're asked to perform. But again, I think it's a very dangerous road to go down. I think, you know, you have to be brave, and it's not easy sometimes. You can still engage with that client or that potential client. And even if you don't succeed in winning an instruction, they know a little bit more about you. They've had that engagement. They might think, you know, this time you're not the one, but next time you'll be given another opportunity. So if you don't have that engagement, even when you're just being asked to quote on doing a piece of work, you're just a transactional business. And that's what we try and ensure that we're not. Stick to your guns and remain confident in your abilities and what you stand for.
Yeah. This may be a question you've actually just answered, but let me ask it anyway, which is, what advice would you give to other leaders as they think about purpose and strategy for their organization?
I read something a while ago, but someone who was sort of parachuted into a family-run business of around about 100 people. And what that person did, which I thought was excellent. So I'm not taking credit, this would be my idea, but this really resonated with me, is that person spent the first 2 to 3 months talking to every individual in that business. Now, depending on the size of the business, that may or may not be feasible. And I wouldn't start talking to the senior people first. I would be talking to everyone else, because I want to hear what's happening on the shop floor. I want to hear how people identify with the business. I want to know what their challenges are, what their perception of the business is. What do they feel their purpose is within the business, and how they see the company. And then I would try and talk to some clients to understand how they see the business. Why do they use the business? What do they see as good? What do they see as bad? What could be improved upon? What's done well? To really understand what the company is all about, because the company can't deliver if your people are not engaged and are driving for the same purpose. So my advice would be to understand the business as perceived, not as you think it is, because often they're very different. One of the things that we also take very seriously is when people leave, as inevitably people do, is to understand the reasons why, and having a very honest conversation. And that conversation has to happen pretty quickly once somebody says they're leaving, because at that time, they're more likely to engage. If you leave it until the last week that they're leaving, it's too late then, because they've already disengaged. So understanding why they've left, because sometimes hearing what people have to say can enable you to address something that isn't quite working as it should be, to prevent further people drifting away, because what the management might think is not a big issue actually is a big issue. And that could be a whole range of things, from working environment to the way that person's been managed, to the way they haven't been listened to, the way that we might not have gone back to that person in addressing a particular concern, whatever it might be. So you can learn a lot from people leaving.
Exactly. Anything we haven't touched on you'd like listeners to know?
I've sort of really banged on about the people bit. Having said it's a bit of a cliche, but you know what? No organization can deliver without the people delivering it. And so it's a sort of false economy. If you're concentrating on who your clients are and looking after your clients, if you can't deliver, the biggest letdown, whatever company it is, if you're not delivering to your clients are going to drift away. And if you can deliver to your clients because your team are delivering, the clients won't drift away. So it's a false economy to look externally before you've looked internally. You can't deliver if you haven't got your people delivering in a way that you want them to deliver. And you can only get them to deliver in a way that you would like them to deliver if they're properly engaged in that process. They feel listened to, they feel empowered, they feel that they have access and support to senior people if they need it, and that support is available to them even perhaps when they don't realize they need it. And I think for the management team, I think you have to be visible. And visible, I mean you have to be face-to-face. Teams Zoom calls are okay, telephone calls okay, but there's nothing like having that personal interaction with an individual. That's absolutely crucial. And that way you're more likely to get proper engagement from people because you're there face-to-face.
I think there's some great wisdom in that. Graham, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for sharing both kind of your own journey, but also what you've learned about leadership and about bringing people together and kind of where purpose fits into all that.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for asking me to be part of it. Appreciate it. Thanks, Belden.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave us a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.